So, this section of notes, we're going to be looking at the Great Depression. And there's a few things about the Great Depression. We're going to talk a little bit about the economics, and we're going to look at the changing role of the government in the economy during this transition period. So, we talked about the 1920s and the roaring economy and the laissez faire era. Now, we need to see what happens as a result of the Great Depression. And it's important to remember what caused the Great Depression. It's not the stock market crash. The stock market crash is a symptom, not the cause of the bad economy. It's kind of like if you have a cold, when you sneeze, that's a sign that you're sick, not the thing that caused you to be sick. The stock market crash is a sneeze. So, what causes the Great Depression? Well, number one, it's all that overproduction we talked about with the farming sector. It's also all of the overproduction in the factory system, right? They produce so much stuff, and not only are prices dropping so much, but with the overproduction comes that reduced consumption, right? People had run out of credit. So you have people buying less, so the demand curve is going down. Plus, you have an oversupply. So the economy is in a really weak position. Then you throw in all the stock market speculation, right? The stock market speculation, this gambling in the stock market. All of those companies were so busy funneling money into the stock market that they weren't paying their workers enough. The workers then couldn't pay off their debts to buy more stuff. And it was just a bad cycle. So they weren't reinvesting in their businesses either. So rather than trying to improve their product, they were trying to get rich quick by investing in the stock market. The way that they were doing that too is also dangerous. They were buying on margin. And we talked about this last time. Buying on margin means that they were borrowing money to invest in the stock market with the assumption that the stock market value is always going to go up, right? And then you sell off your shares really quick. You pay off the money that you borrowed up to 90% of the value of the stock. You pay off that money, and then you get to keep what's left over. And that works great if the stock market is always going up. But when it starts going down, then all of a sudden that leads to a spiraling crash because more people demand their money back that was borrowed to buy the stock. When people demand that money back, that forces stock markets onto the trade. And that means that there's more stock available, which drives down the prices, which leads to more people calling in. And it's just this vicious cycle down. So those are the causes of the stock market crash and the Great Depression. Another very important reason for the Great Depression was the growing gap between the rich and the poor. And some people will say, who cares if the rich are getting richer? And the problem is that the poor people weren't able to keep up with all of the demand. So the rich people were taking more of the share of the income. Poor people weren't able to keep up by buying more things. They couldn't pay off their credit or their debts, and that leads to a bigger problem. We already mentioned this, but farmers are struggling. First of all, there's less farmers. If you look at this table here, between 1910 and 1960, you can see that there's there's a lot less farms, right? Starting around 1940, right? 1950, 1960. And then if you look over here in 1910, right? 11.7 million farmers. By 1940, there's 9.5 million. By 1960, 5.9. And a lot of that has to do with automation and mechanization, right? You just need a lot less farmers to grow the same amount of stuff, even more stuff. So while there's more production, there's less farmers, and that's going to lead to a lot of farmer struggles as well. That just hints at that overproduction we talked about, which was driving down the prices. And all that leads to what's referred to as Black Tuesdays, the stock market crash, right? The stock market crash is a symptom, not a cause of the Great Depression, but all of that wealth that had been built up by those really rich people that had been invested in the stock market just kind of disappears. Now, Black Tuesday, you can see the peak is right here, right? The peak is right there, and then it crashes, and then there's a little bit of a rebound, and then it goes into the full depression. Black Tuesday is when the stock market crashed. It comes back a little bit by Friday, but then over the weekend it drops again, so that there's a full-on crash. The United States did not react well to the stock market crash. The federal government tried to protect businesses by increasing the tariff. They wanted to protect American businesses. But the problem was the United States was in a global economy at this point. And when the United States put up all those trade barriers, all of a sudden other countries put trade barriers on American products. So those American businesses that had already overproduced and now couldn't sell stuff to Americans who were suffering throughout the Great Depression. Now they couldn't trade with other countries either. So it just kind of puts a gridlock. It's a roadblock on trade, and that really hurts the United States. The Federal Reserve, which we talked about a couple weeks ago, the Federal Reserve, which was controlling the money supply, had been really loose during the 1920s. They had allowed people to borrow a lot of money, right? Put more money in circulation, more money goes into the stock market, more money is being traded. And then when the Great Depression happens and the stock market crash happens, the Federal Reserve panicked and said, well, if the loose money caused the Great Depression, maybe if we tighten up that money supply and make it harder for people to get money, they won't trade down the stock market. Maybe that'll cause things to be fixed. And it had the wrong effect, right? By tightening the money supply, it made it harder for small banks to give out loans to businesses to stay open. And when that happens, people lost their jobs, which means there was more suffering, there was less money to go around. So by 1933, the United States unemployment rate was around 25%. It's even higher if you take out the factory workers, right? The bank runs. Once it became clear that the economy was crashing, a lot of people ran to the banks to try to get their money out of the bank before the bank failed. See, back in the day, there was no protection. If your money was in a bank and the bank collapsed and it ran out of money, you just lost all your savings. So a lot of banks faced what were called runs, people literally running to the bank to get their money out before everybody else could, which caused them to go bankrupt, right? Even if a bank was stable, the hint, the threat, the fear that a bank might collapse could lead to a bank run, which would cause the bank to collapse. Depression led to a decline in production, right? If people aren't buying stuff, then the businesses didn't need to make stuff. So they made less, right? And you can see that here. The peak right here is 1929, right? And then it dips throughout until 1932 when Roosevelt takes over. So this is production. So peaks in 1929, then production collapses. Now, the reason that's important is because if businesses are not making stuff, they don't need people to work, which means they fired people, which means those people couldn't buy things. And if those people can't buy things, that means that the businesses don't have to make things, which means they fire more people. And it's this vicious cycle downwards. At the same time all of this is happening, the Dust Bowl is raging throughout the Midwest. The Dust Bowl happens here, right? The red spot is the place where the majority of the Dust Bowl happens, but the Dust Bowl is from southern Texas all the way through the Dakotas. Millions of people had to abandon their homes because of the dust storms. Those people that moved from places like Kansas and Oklahoma and Texas, they moved to California. And when they got to California, the people on the West Coast called them Okies. And this was a slur. It was not meant as a compliment, right? Maybe it was where they were from, maybe it wasn't. But to be called an Okie was to be called kind of low-class white trash. The thing that the people did when they got to California, they were migrant laborers. They were out there picking the fruits and vegetables. It's a really hard job for a lot of low pay. It's kind of the lowest rung of the social scale out in California. It led to a lot of human tolls, rising unemployment. People demanded some assistance. There's a lot of hunger, a lot of homelessness. Because of that, birth rates went down. You don't want to have a baby if you can't feed it. Marriage rates go down. Didn't want to get married if you couldn't afford to have a wife and family. The interesting thing, too, is the divorce rate went down, but that's only because the husbands abandoned their families and didn't bother to hire a lawyer. So the human toll of the Great Depression is immense. And we can see here, this is an unemployment line. It's a food line. People are waiting here to get a free meal. So what was the response? People got desperate, right? 25% unemployment in overall among the Black community. Unemployment rate was about 50%. Women were often the ones that were the first fired, assuming that the idea was that they were taking a man's job. A lot of businesses would keep women on because you could pay them less. So it's a very complicated system here, right? Working women do suffer. Oftentimes they're fired because they are taking a man's job. Minorities suffered because Well, racism. There's a lot of discrimination against minorities, especially the black population. They were often the first fired from the factories. And again, 50% unemployment among the black community. And the president at the time, Herbert Hoover, was um, had been elected because he was a financial wizard, but he's going to not have the answers for this. Hoover was an avowed capitalist. He believed that the market would come back. So he asked businesses to just stay open, to maintain their hours, and to maintain the wages. He didn't think it was the responsibility of the federal government to directly help people either. Now, the businesses couldn't stay open. If they weren't making a profit, they couldn't pay the workers. They didn't have any way to get a loan because the Federal Reserve had tightened the money supply. So without businesses staying open voluntarily, he didn't think the federal government could force them to stay open and to pay people. He doesn't think that the government should be getting involved directly in people's lives. Instead, he told people to go get charity, to rely on family, or my favorite phrase, pull themselves up by the bootstraps, right? Use individual initiative. Now, it's meant as a jest when people talked about Hoover. If you're stuck in the mud, you can't pull yourself up by pulling on your bootstraps. You need help from somebody else. And everybody knew that. So when somebody says, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, they're kind of making fun of you and saying that you're poor because of yourself and that you really do need help from other people. He tried to stay positive. He became a cheerleader for capitalism. He said recovery was right around the corner, but spoiler alert, recovery was not right around the corner. He tried a bunch of things that failed. He tried to balance the budget, which means only spending as much as the government had. And that's fine if you're an individual working with your own budget, but it's short-sighted. He increased taxes, which meant there was less money for people to pay off their debts and to buy stuff, which meant that factories laid off more people. He cut the budget, which meant that people lost their jobs within the government. And all of the things that he tried to do undermined the economic growth of the United States. He's not very successful in helping people. And by keeping the government out of people's lives, he didn't really make himself very popular. And then we have the Bonus Army March. So a lot of veterans during the 1920s, when the economy was good, had gotten a promise from Congress that Congress would give them a bonus around 1945, which would be about the time that they were retiring. So Congress, when the economy is good, promised those World War I veterans that they were going to get some money, but they had to wait 20 years or whatever. When the Depression hit, those bonus army marchers had lost their jobs. They needed something. They didn't have a job, so they didn't have a reason to stay in their hometowns. They decided they were going to march to Washington and demand their bonus early. They set up a Hooverville outside of Washington, D.C., and they went to Congress and asked for the money. Congress denied them. Some of them went home. But they went to Congress and they demanded. Congress said no. They set up a Hooverville and stuck around because where else are they going to go? And then Hoover is running for re-election and doesn't want a bunch of homeless veterans outside of Washington, D.C., making it look like he can't maintain law and order. So he sends in the cops to ask them to leave, which leads to a big brawl. And we can see here the Bonus Army marchers are being attacked by the police. And then that didn't work, so he says he was going to send in the Army, right? Because these are veterans and they respect the chain of command. And the veterans are told to leave, and the Army does what the Army does. When they refused, they used tear gas containers to try to get them out, which caught their little ramshackle Hooverville on fire. And now it looks like Hoover has attacked American veterans who are just asking for some help, leads to him becoming even more unpopular. And then in 1932, the Democratic candidate Franklin Delano Roosevelt, or FDR, promised to use the government to help people directly, right? After 3 years of hearing from Herbert Hoover that it's not the government's job to help people, all of a sudden Franklin Roosevelt's coming in saying, yes, the government can be used to help you. And he promised the 3 R's: relief, recovery, and reform. Relief to just get money into people's pockets, recovery to make sure the economy gets back on track again, and to reform the economy so it doesn't break again. Eventually, we're going to call all of this the New Deal. But the important part of this is that he's going to use the government to help people, and it's going to expand presidential powers. He wins easily in 1932. All of these red states over here, these are all Roosevelt states. And you'll notice here in the North, Pennsylvania, all these states here, these are going to be Republican Hoover states. Not really sure why, but if you think about that's where all the factories and the banks are, that might help to make a little bit more sense. The federal government is going to start taking an active role in solving these economic problems now.